Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our post-cabinet briefing. We have with us this morning the Honorable Favor Williams, Minister of Education, Youth and Information, the Honorable Robert Nestor Morgan, Minister of State in the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, Dr. Cassan Troop, our Chief Education Officer, acting Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, other staff supporting from the Ministry of Education, and members of the press. Welcome. I'll hand you over now to Minister Williams, who will take us through the decisions.
Thank you, PS. Good morning, everyone. Let me acknowledge as well our Permanent Secretary Acting, Dr. Maureen Dwyer, our Chief Education Officer, Dr. Cassan Troop, and I know that our State Minister, Minister Robert Nestor Morgan, is online. Oh, he's online. Good morning, Minister Morgan. Good morning to members of the media. So we will begin with the decisions of Cabinet, and just so you know, these decisions are those that we would have closed the year with in 2021. Cabinet will meet again next Monday for the first meeting of the new year, 2022. So Cabinet gave approval for the promulgation of a special benefit order effective 30th of July 2021 to facilitate the allocation of 178 housing solutions at the Estuary Phase 2 housing development in St. James to contributors to the National Housing Trust. Cabinet also gave approval for 2 persons from the disabled community to be included in the reservation of 50 solutions for persons whose income place them in the 0% income band and who would be allowed to join with individuals in higher income bands for the purpose of affordability. Cabinet also approved the issuance of drafting instructions to the Chief Parliamentary Council to facilitate the promulgation of the said special benefit order. Cabinet also gave approval for the Minister of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade to participate as a member of the Advisory Board of the International Women's Network, an initiative of the European Union, Latin America, and the Caribbean International Foundation. The EU LAC, International Women's Network, is an initiative of the President of the EU LAC Foundation, acting as a bi-regional platform to support the international commitments of the 2 regions around the gender agenda. The principal goal of the International Women's Network is the promotion of public policies of international scope for the generation of gender equality and equity environments in Latin America and the Caribbean and the European Union. Cabinet gave approval for the bill entitled the Trafficking in Persons Prevention, Suppression and Punishment Amendment Act 2021 to be introduced in the Houses of Parliament. The principal act is being amended to deal with fines and penalties. We also had amendment to the Agricultural Produce Act. Cabinet gave approval for the amendment of the Agricultural Produce Act in order to strengthen and modernize this legislation for the purpose of effectively regulating trade and movement of agricultural produce. Cabinet also gave approval for the consequential amendment to the Rural Agricultural Development Authority Act to empower the Rural Agricultural Development Authority, to collect payment in relation to the proposed amendments, consequential amendment to the Predial Larceny Prevention Act to make the definition of agricultural produce consistent with the Agricultural Produce Act as amended, and the issuance of drafting instructions to the Chief Parliamentary Council. Cabinet gave approval for the acquisition of the leasehold interest for the unexpired term of the lease in property located at 24 Grove Road in Mandeville, Manchester, at a cost of $10,435,000 for the purpose of relocating the Manchester Justice Center. The Ministry of Justice seeks to improve the physical infrastructure involved in the delivery of justice services to the people of Jamaica and is in the process of increasing access to justice services across the country. The justice centers will be equipped to handle justice-related matters such as child diversion, restorative justice, and dispute resolution, and will serve as a point of contact between custodies and justices of the peace. Cabinet also gave approval for the reassigning of the said property to the Ministry of Justice. We will turn now to the reports. Cabinet received and approved the following annual reports and or financial statements to be tabled in Parliament. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Toll Authority for the 2019-2020 financial year. Annual report of the Caribbean Maritime Institute, CMI, for the financial year 2014-2015. Annual report of the SCJ Holdings Limited for the year ended March 31, 2015. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Jamaica Agricultural Society, JAS, for the year ended March 31, 2019. Annual report and audited financial statement of Devon House Development Limited for the year 2020-2021. Annual report and audited financial statements of the Kingston Container Terminal, KCT Services Limited, for the 3-month period, April 2016 to June 2016 of the 2016-2017 financial year. We move now to contracts, and we have quite a number of contracts that the Cabinet approved, and I'll move through them quickly. The first is Cabinet ratified variation number 3 of a contract by the Port Authority of Jamaica to MZ Holdings Limited in the amount of $26,872,864.20 for the provision of security and dispatching services at the Port of Ocho Rios, Ocho Rios Port Ship Terminal, and Ocho Rios Fishing Village and environs of the Falmouth Cruise Ship Terminal for the period September 1, 2020 to August 31st, 2021. Cabinet also approved variation number 4 of a contract by the Port Authority of Jamaica to MZ Holdings Limited in the amount of $7,269,177.60, including general consumption tax, GCT, for the provision of security services at the Ocho Rios Cruise Ship Terminal and Ocho Rios Fishing Village for the 6 months period September 1, 2021 to 28th of February 2022 on a 24-hour per day basis. Cabinet approved the award of a contract for the provision of security guard services to the locations of the Transport Authority for a period of 3 years in the amount of $306,178,668, inclusive of GCT, and that contract was awarded to Marksman Limited. Cabinet approved the award of contract for the continuing provision of consulting services to the Compensation Review for the Government of Jamaica in the amount of US $959,094.36, excluding taxes, to Ernst & Young Services Limited. Cabinet approved the award of a contract for the provision of ships handling or marine services for Petrojam for a period of 3 years in the amount of $268,628,487, inclusive of GCT, and that contract was awarded to A.E. Parnell Company Limited. Cabinet also approved the award of a contract by the Factories Corporation of Jamaica for the construction of two-story mini warehouses at the Garmex Free Zone Complex in the parish of Kingston in the amount of $338 million, and that contract was awarded to Tank Weld Limited. Cabinet approved the award of a contract by the Urban Development Corporation, UDC, for the provision of external auditing services for the UDC and its subsidiaries for a period of 3 years, ending 31st March 2021, 2022, and 2023, in the amount of $72,722,668, inclusive of taxes, and that contract was awarded to PricewaterhouseCoopers. Cabinet also approved the award of a contract for the renewal of insurance coverage for the Jamaica Urban Transit Company Limited, JUTC, through Marathon Insurance Brokers Limited for the period October 1, 2021 to September 30, 2022, with the recommended insurers being Advantage General Insurance Company and Lloyd's Insurance of London, and premiums as set out in the approval. Cabinet also approved the award of a contract for the provision of operational staff uniforms for the Jamaica Urban Transit Company Limited, JUTC, for the period 2021-2022 and 2022-2023 in the amount of $89,833,645.75, inclusive of GCT, and that contract was awarded to Fifth Avenue Traders Limited. Cabinet approved the variation of a contract for the provision of security services at health facilities in St. Mary and Portland for a period of 1 year in the amount of $53,321,416.76, and this contract was awarded to Shark Electronic Security Limited. Cabinet also approved the award of a contract for the provision of marketing and advertising services in the global tourist market space for a period of 3 years from December 1, 2021 to November 30, 2024 in the amount of US $41,820,000, and that contract was awarded to Essentia Interactive Marketing Services, LLC. Cabinet approved the award of a contract in the amount of US $2,243,055.95, inclusive of GCT, for the provision of 11,500 tablets by eLearning Jamaica Company Limited, and that contract was awarded to Productive Business Solutions Limited. Cabinet approved the award of a contract, another award of a contract by eLearning Jamaica Company Limited on behalf of the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, Staten, for the provision of 7,525 tablets for use in the conduct of the 2022 Population and Housing Census, and that contract was in the amount of US $2,319,205, inclusive of GCT, and that contract was awarded to Smart Mobile Solutions Jamaica Limited. And that's the end of the decisions and contracts from Cabinet. Let me just say a few words in terms of the new school term. So the Easter term would have started on Monday, and it commenced with 608 schools reopened for face-to-face engagement. Of this number, 568 are primary schools, 10 infant schools, and 30 secondary schools across all 7 regions. By those numbers, you would see that there are still many schools that are in the online mode. So we have 173 primary schools and 120 secondary schools that have engaged students using the online modality. So far, the majority of schools that are back in the face-to-face environment have reported no issues. There are some schools that reported to us, and those were 23 schools reported that students or teachers would have called in to say that they have flu-like symptoms and were remaining at home. In one instance, there's one school that reported the principal having called in to say that he had tested positive for COVID and was remaining at home. There was another instance in which a teacher had called in to say that they had to be quarantined at home for some period of time. In terms of the non-COVID related issues that we saw, obviously our ongoing fight is with the termites in our schools, and that situation gets worse when our schools are closed and there's no human being moving around at the school. We spent millions of dollars during the last school year dealing with the termite issues, but of course it's ongoing, and so we continue our efforts in that regards. There are not too many schools. I think 1 or 2 schools reported termite issues, and those are being taken care of. In terms of attendance at schools that were open for face-to-face, attendance was mixed. We saw full attendance in the smaller primary schools, and by smaller primary schools we mean schools with 30, 40, 50 students. For the larger schools, attendance was relatively low, but again, these are early days in terms of school reopening, and because schools are using the rotation approach and the staggered resumption, this is what we would expect. As the days go by, we're expecting to see more and more of our students back into the face-to-face environment. I've been asked many times, and I've answered the question, but it's worth doing here again. What are the plans to remedy the learning loss? And I will just quickly outline for Jamaicans what are our plans, beginning with the early childhood sector. This year, we will ensure that we do the age 4 assessment of our students in the early childhood sector to see where they are in terms of early literacy and early numeracy, and it's important that we do this assessment so we get a good grasp on the learning loss. We will use the time, so if we do it at age 4, we will use the next year of their lives, age 5, to do the necessary intervention. So by the time they become 6 years of age and are ready to go to primary school, they will be in a better state to take on the work at the primary school. So it's an important activity that we will do this year, the age 4 assessment of our children in the early childhood sector. That will allow us to customize the learning as well, or at least begin that process for our children. In our primary schools, we will do our testing at grades 1 and 2, and I do have our Chief Education Officer here. She could elaborate more on this. That will help us, again, to see exactly where our students are, and it will allow us to take the necessary intervention. We have begun already having specialist teachers in the primary schools in 8 subject areas, and it will allow for just deeper engagement between the students and the teachers. It will allow for better learning to take place when you have teachers who are specialists in their particular subject areas, teaching the subject, from grades 1 to 6. It will be a better learning environment for everyone, for the teacher, for the student. And our expectation is that as we go along and as we do our measurements, we're expecting to see improvement in mathematics, in English, and in all the subject areas, the 8 subject areas in which we have these specialist teachers. We are beginning with about 230 of our primary schools, and we'll add more as we move into successive terms. For our high school, all our students who are moving from primary school into high school, they will move with information about where they are in terms of their learning. So for the PEP exams that our students would have taken in last year, they would have moved to primary school in one of three. One of three? Right, one of three pathways. So on the PEP results that the high school would have gotten about the primary school student, it would indicate if there's a need for intervention. So if there's no need for intervention because the child is operating at a high level, that is on their PEP result. If there's need for intervention, it's there, and for those students who need intense intervention, it is there as well. So the teacher who's accepting these students will know right away kind of where the child is, where the students are in terms of their learning. So that will help in our high schools, especially for our incoming primary school students who have transitioned to high school. Additionally, as well, you will note that the students who graduated last year in grade 11, they would have missed about a year and a half of face-to-face. And so for those students, or sixth form, the two additional sixth form pathway programs that we have implemented will be particularly important for those students to help them to recover the learning loss. And obviously for other students, it will be a case of teachers identifying where the students are in terms of their learning and putting in place programs for them in school. In many cases, additional work, additional homework, additional in-class work for those students. Layered on top of all of this will be our national homework support program, or national after-school program that we will implement in a more vigorous way as we get more into the face-to-face at schools in order to help our children to recover from the learning loss. I've always said education takes time, learning takes time, and we should get it, we should adopt, we should absorb, we should believe that you have to spend a lot of hours learning. There's no getting around it. If you look at other countries that excel, whose students get high marks, they put in the work. And we have to do the same in Jamaica. And that's why we believe the national homework support, the national after-school support program that would be available for all of our students, either using the virtual world or face-to-face, will be important, because simply going to school for 5 or 6 hours during the day with all the activities at school is not enough for our students to learn. We know that in Jamaica, over the decades, many parents with means get private tutors for their children. Why? Because they realize that learning takes time. You just need to put in more hours to really excel at what you're doing. And it's not just in education. Take any field. If you want to be good in anything, you have to put in the hours. If you want to be a good runner like Usain Bolt, you have to put in the work. If you want to be a good pianist, a good computer programmer, a good doctor, a good lawyer, you have to put it in. So in education, we have to get to that point in Jamaica where we realize that, yes, our children really need to buckle down to their work and really excel. It's within all of us. There's no child who's going to school that cannot do maths. It's within us. There's no child going to school that can't do any subject. It's the attitude that we have. It's the attitude that we inculcate in our children that will determine whether they succeed or not. Obviously, there are other variables in the environment as well that we have to deal with, but having the right attitude is a large percent of that. So that's what I have to say about education this morning and getting back into the face-to-face environment. Yesterday I was out at Rock Hall Primary School, and it was a joy to see the students come back. They were singing, they were having devotion, of course. They were all in their masks. They were observing the physical distancing, and I think our children get it. When I see them in schools and even outside of schools, they get it. They get the mask wearing, they get the hand washing, they get the physical distancing. And it's incumbent on us as adults and as parents to follow their lead, to protect ourselves, to protect them, and to get the vaccines. I mean, gosh, it's been almost 2 years now. Billions of people around the world have taken these vaccines. They are still strong and healthy, and, truth of the matter is we can end this pandemic. We know how. It's within our reach to do so. But we have to do those things that will cause it to end, and one of those is to become vaccinated. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. First time I'm seeing you guys for the new year. We will now open the floor to questions from the media. Do we have anyone on?
Yes, good morning.
Could you
Minister.
state, is this Kimon Francis?
Yes. Right.
Thank you very much. You may pose your question.
All right. I actually have several, but I'll go with two right now. When will the Orlando Patterson Education Commission report be made public? And did the government facilitate talks between Palacios and the U.S. while he was being held here?
As it relates to the foreign affairs matter, I think that the best avenue would be directly through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of National Security. As you would imagine, that matter relates to an international extradition / transfer of a suspect. I would not be armed with those details to answer you as it relates to that. It would have to come directly from the Ministry of National Security and Foreign Affairs. As it relates to the Patterson report, it is now, Cabinet has considered it, and we expect that later this month, the report will be made public so that people like yourself can analyze it and give the public knowledge as to what it contains.
But with respect to the Palacios issue, international media, such as the Associated Press, has reported that Jamaica, Colombia, and the U.S. did collaborate to get him out of Jamaica and to the U.S. So it's a yes or no. I'm not asking for detail.
Well, I cannot confirm or deny. I'm not, as I said to you, armed with the facts on that matter. The issues of extradition and persons who are suspected of high crimes is a very sensitive matter, and to not mislead you or to not speak imprecisely, I think what we could do is you could send me your question, and I'll personally attend upon the Ministry of National Security or Foreign Affairs and then give you the response that they have given.
Okay, not a problem.
Thank you very much.
Am I allowed to go again, or?
Well, maybe we should give somebody else a chance, and then you can continue after. We have Althea Saunders from the Jamaica Observer. Ms. Saunders, Happy New Year. Althea? Althea, see your hand up. Can we move on until she sorts out her technology? I see we have Mr. Edmund Campbell from the Gleaner. Mr. Campbell, could you go ahead, please?
Good morning, Mr. Morgan. Good morning to the ministry team, and all the very best to you for the new year.
Happy New Year to you too, sir.
Very well. All right, I have several questions, but I'll start with the first three. Minister, in terms of an update, has the $124 million paid to the JCTE that was reported in the Auditor General's report last year. Has that sum been recovered or accounted for by the ministry? That's the first one. The second one, the Auditor General in her report on the same JCTE had recommended that surcharge action be instituted against Permanent Secretary Dean Roy Bernard and Dr. Grace McLean. What decision has been made on this recommendation at this time? And the third question is, will Dr. McLean be returning to the Ministry of Education this month or anytime soon, and in what capacity?
I will answer your third question, but I will give the minister the opportunity to speak on the issue of the monies as well as the surcharge. As it relates to your third question, as you are aware, the constituted authorities are currently in the midst of their investigation. You may also be aware as well that the individual of which you refer is currently on leave. As the investigation progresses, the investigation will inform the future actions of the government as it relates to the particular investigation. It would be inappropriate for us to act without being empowered by the constituted authority, as we also have to contemplate that persons have legal rights that they, under the Constitution and various statutes, benefit from. So we have to also recognize the power of the constituted authority and balance that with the rights of the individual. So it would be highly improper for us to pronounce on somebody's future without empowered by what is being done in terms of the investigation and so on. I will now ask Minister to come and speak on the two other questions that you asked for.
So, Mr. Campbell, you asked about the $124 million that was paid to JCTE, and I think the question was, has it been recovered? To say, well, the investigations are still ongoing. Investigations are being conducted by Financial Investigation Department, FID, and the MOCA. The investigations are continuing, so no, there has not been any recovery yet of that $124 million. With regards to your question about the surcharge, was there any surcharge action? Surcharge action was taken by the Ministry of Finance and the Public Service, and letters would have been written to our Permanent Secretary acting in that regard, and I know that she has taken the necessary steps to deliver the letters that would have come to her. Thank you.
Mr. Campbell, I will come back to you, but do you have a follow-up? I cannot. Hold on a second, Mr. Campbell. Can we bring him back up? Could you repeat your question, Mr. Campbell? We're not hearing him. Is your mic, can he hear me? We're not hearing you, Mr. Campbell. All right. I'm going to come back to you, Mr. Campbell, but allow somebody else, because I'm not hearing you. So can we move on to, is Alfia back?
Yes, I'm here. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. Happy New Year.
Thank you. Same to you.
Please go ahead with your question, yes.
All right. Minister Williams, could you please provide an update on the minimum 65% vaccination coverage that was a target for the face-to-face reopening of high schools? And can you say what is the current level of vaccination among that cohort?
So last year we would have announced that we would like our schools to get to a 65% vaccination target among the school's population, And of course, we set about doing a number of vaccination blitz. Last time I checked, we had done well over 200 such vaccination blitz all across our secondary schools. Despite all that effort, we were only able to get to 32% at the end of December. We're still continuing vaccination efforts in our schools, but as of this moment, that 65% target is something still to be worked towards. However, we have indicated that all students can come back into the face-to-face environment, and you would have known that the 65% target would have been the national target for Jamaica as well as for the education sector.
Do we have any other new questions before we go back to the follow-ups? All right, Kimon, you can start with your follow-ups, I think, and then we go to Edmund.
Thanks, Minister. When will the government declare buffer zones for the cockpit country protected area, and is compensatory land being considered for Noranda?
All right, so you may recall that as contemplated in the draft declaration of the cockpit country, I think it was 2017, buffer zones were a part of the determination. The fact of the matter is, however, that we have yet to fully perfect the legislative aspects of the cockpit country. So while the government is honoring the cockpit country protected area in spirit, and we are almost complete with the ground truthing exercise being carried out by the Forestry Department, the fact is that legislatively there hasn't been any legislative action or gazetting of what would be in future known as the cockpit country protected area, even though we are ensuring that there's no mining taking place in what is the proposed protected area as we do the ground truthing and as we make the necessary adjustments. So yes, buffer zones are a part of the cockpit country protected area. As you may recall, there are various water resources there, flora and fauna, maybe archaeological assets there as well. So it's a very important area for us, and the government has done a lot of work since 2016 to ensure that the area is protected and that there is no mining in the proposed cockpit country protected area, as well as the proposed buffer zones. Your second question was about compensation for Noranda?
Right.
I don't know, I can't respond to that. That's a very new one. I would have to refer to the Ministry of Mining to get a response on that. But to jog in memory, the contention, as you may be aware, was questions by environmentalists as to whether the proposed mining areas that Noranda was entitled to based on long-standing contracts that existed long before this government, would compromise the integrity of the cockpit country and the assets that it has there, natural resources. And a lot of work was done over the last 3 to 4 years to find reasonable compromises that fall on the benefit of the environment rather than the benefit of the extraction of the resource. So the recent announcement by Minister Montague is in the same spirit of ensuring that as much as possible we will do everything we can to ensure that the cockpit country protected areas proposed and areas surrounding it are protected. And even where, in this case, you see where an area way outside the protected proposed area has been approved for exploration, there are stringent criteria that have been put in place, not just to protect what is there in terms of physical infrastructure, but also to protect persons who may own land, who may live proximate to any mining activity. I was listening where it was advised that one of the closest areas was about 1+ kilometers away, and there will be stringent monitoring of dust pollution and those sort of things. So I don't know, and we will have to speak to Minister Montague about it as it relates to compensatory land for Naranda. I don't know, I cannot comment on it. What I can speak about is the significant work that has been done by the Jamaica Bauxite Institute, by National Environmental Protection Authority, by the Water Resources Authority, by the Prime Minister himself, by the Partnership Council, by environmentalists such as Jamaica Environment Trust, and several other organizations to come to a settled position on an issue that has been dogging us as a country since independence. And we're very happy that we have reached this stage. There's a lot more work to be done as it relates to the protection of our resources. But we are confident that the work that we have done over the last several years has been to the benefit of the environment and the country.
But Minister, as it relates to the buffer zones, while they have been identified or written in, when will they be declared and when will legislation come? Is there a legislative push?
There is a legislative push. So let us look at, and we can go into the rudiments of the legislative process, but I won't bore you with that. So you have a policy, then you have various legislative papers in Parliament, and then you have a bill. In this case, you probably are going to have to amend certain bills. But what has happened over the last 4 years, several processes have been taking place concurrently. So we had the consultations with the stakeholders, persons within the space, persons within government entities, persons within private business, as to where could the government go with the cockpit country, if you remember. And there was a lot of conversation within the society. There are various positions as it relates to where the cockpit country ends and where it begins. One school of thought said the entire Western Jamaica, going all the way down to Appleton, was the cockpit country. There was another school of thought that said it was more restrictive and so on. But we were able to come to a scientific determination based on historical facts, based on geology, based on geomorphology, if that's the correct word. When that was done, the Prime Minister made a presentation in Parliament where he presented a map outlining what the proposed cockpit country protected area was. And all government agencies were empowered to acknowledge the government's policy directive as it relates to the cockpit country protected area, including buffer zones. The NEPA, which essentially approves environmental permits for extraction of minerals in anywhere in Jamaica, Water Resources Authority, the Jamaica Bauxite Institute, the Forestry Department have all been working collaboratively to ensure that there is no mining in the cockpit country proposed protected area. Additionally, there have been accusations of mining in the past, and we have used satellite technology and all of those things and demonstrated that we have recognized and activated the spirit of the policy decision that the Prime Minister made in 2017. So you can be assured that as the concurrent process of legislative change rolls forward, that the government has already started acting as if the law is already in place, which is that there will be no mining in the cockpit country protected area and the buffer zones associated with it. And you know, Kimon, the speed at which legislative change happens within our society is something that we need to improve. But we're not waiting on that to act and protect. We're protecting and acting as we are obligated to do.
Thank you.
Ricardo Brooks from Nationwide News Network. Happy New Year, Ricardo.
Happy New Year, Minister. Good morning. 3 quick questions. First of all, can you say when the country can expect the tabling and passage of the new Firearms Act and the Enhanced Security Measures Act? Also, following up on what the minister said, has the acting permanent secretary yet advised Mrs. McLean of the search charge, and when can we expect her to remit those payments? And thirdly, does the minister retain confidence in Dr. McLean to return to the ministry as permanent secretary when her leave ends?
Thank you, Ricardo. I see you have started off on the front foot, but we too have some cricketing skills. The first question, well, let me answer the question about confidence. I think it's I would say, an unfair question to ask the minister in light of the fact, as you will be well aware because you reported it extensively on your station, that there's an investigation taking place. So it is a bit premature to even ask the minister about confidence, as the minister would not be in a position to express confidence or a lack thereof in light of questions and investigations. The only thing I will say on behalf of the minister is that persons within our legal Commonwealth jurisdiction are innocent until proven otherwise. So we await the outcomes of the investigations before we make any pronouncement on any person's guilt or innocence. The second question about surcharge letters, they have been furnished with the persons. They have been delivered to the persons in question. It is now for the persons in question to activate whatever mechanisms within 30 days. Yes, they have 30 days to respond, and they are empowered to activate whatever personal action they seek to take in that regard. That's a matter that is managed by the Ministry of Finance. The ministry has just been a conduit for transferring the information. What was your third question, Ricardo?
The amended Firearms Act and the Security Measures Act, enhanced one. When do we expect those to be tabled?
You do know that the Prime Minister spoke about the Firearms Act in his New Year's message, and the Minister of National Security, as well as the Attorney General and others, have spoken about the enhanced security measures legislation. I can tell you that those pieces of legislation are very far down the wicket in terms of drafting, and I think the government has expressed its commitment to reform some of the laws that deal with safety and justice, particularly laws that directly impact incidents of crime. So I suspect in the new parliamentary year, you will see some movement on those two pieces of legislation. But if you notice, I'm very careful in my pronouncements because I cannot pronounce on behalf of Cabinet as it relates to these things. So that while we know that the legislation is far down the wicket, we still have to wait on the Minister of National Security as well as the Prime Minister, who are both leading these two pieces of legislation, to pronounce on them. So that's as much as I can say to you about that. But expect good things this year. I think Edmund had a follow-up question.
Yeah, are you hearing me now, Mr. Morgan?
Perfect, Edmund, perfect.
All right, very well. No, I just wanted clarity came based on your response just now in one respect. But could you also just explain to the public the implications of the surcharge in relation to the persons? And moving on to another issue, Minister Morgan. In the throne speech in February last year, it was announced that the Children Adoption Amendment Bill, the Child Care and Protection Amendment Bill, and the amendment to the Access to Information Act and regulations would be brought to Parliament this legislative year. I think your ministry is responsible for these pieces of legislation. Could you tell us when these pieces of legislation will come to Parliament, and also indicate to us whether the ministry or the minister has taken any particular piece of legislation to Parliament during this legislative year? It ends next month, but to date, has she taken any legislative issue to Parliament? And there is an issue, Minister Morgan. Last year, I think the Minister of Finance had indicated.
Edmund, could you're asking, I mean, you're bowling some very strong balls here. You should give me a time to settle in the crease. Let me answer them one at a time. As it relates to the explaining what a surcharge is, I think the public service rules empower the Ministry of Finance to surcharge individuals who may be found to have acted in a particular manner as it relates to taxpayers' funds. As you would recall, in the Auditor General's report, she did recommend she would have recommended surcharge based on opinion that the individuals would have brought undue exposure to the government in terms of taxpayers' dollars. You would recognize that I'm being very careful in my wording, because the recommendation of a surcharge doesn't necessarily mean that the person is convicted of a crime. So what has happened is that, based on the recommendation of the Auditor General, the Ministry of Finance, which has responsibility for these issues, has acted on that recommendation. And we all will have to wait to see what the outcome of that action is. It's a bit unprecedented, Edmund. I don't recall in my life as a journalist or being proximate to government that we've ever had such a action taken by the Ministry of Finance. So it is something that we all have to, as citizens and public servants, observe keenly to see what the outcome of it is. As it relates to your other questions about the Child Care and Protection Act and the Adoption Act. So we have been speaking about this for over a year, and a little background is that the Adoption Act has not been really reformed since it was put in place in pre-independence, I suspect. And the last time it was tinkered was in the 80s. Now we, and under the minister's direction, made a conscious decision when we became ministers on September of 2020 that the Adoption Act is one of the priority legislation that we have to reform. It has been a very difficult law to modernize. There have been dozens of consultations over the last 20 years with varying opinions as to what adoption should look like and how it should manifest in legislation. Additionally, there have been conventions that have been signed by Jamaica, which would impact the Adoption Act. So it's not just a new Adoption Act, it's also about contemplating whether or not the new act acquiesces to what the government of Jamaica has agreed to be in international fora. But I can say to you that we have finished the policy. We finished it, I think it was in the second week of December. We spent a lot of time reviewing the draft policy and we finished it. We're supposed to have a legislative meeting today where the policy should be presented to legislative meeting. But that is not the end of the process. After that process, when it leaves the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, it now has to go to the Ministry of Finance. It has to go through the Chief Parliamentary Council. It has to go to LRD, Legal Reform Department. Then it has to go to the Attorney General's Department. And then it has to come back to us to make any adjustments that they recommend to the policy. And then after all of that is done, it then has to go to Cabinet. So when I said earlier to Kimon that our legislative process is quite, and as a new minister, I must confess that I was quite shocked at the levels. And the levels are necessary as legislation impacts the lives of every single Jamaican. So you cannot be willy-nilly in your actions because one bad clause can damage the life of a family. So where we are now is that the policy from the Ministry of Education's perspective is finished and to be approved by our legislative committee, chaired by our minister today. And then that will now go to the various agencies and offices. Child Care and Protection Act, we're a bit further down the line with that. As you know, that act has been pregnant for review for a long time. You would remember that Minister Kamina Johnson-Smith tabled a private members in the motion in the Senate in, I think, 2013, coming out of the killing of Kian Lamont, who was a pregnant woman in St. Thomas, and that predicated her to ask for the reform of the laws that deal with the assault of women and so on, laws that deal with how the vulnerable are treated, laws that deal with how children are treated. The previous administration, I think, started the Joint Select Committee, and then it was paused for whatever reason. We started it up back, and we completed the reform in, I think, 2018, the review. It was sent to the ministry. When we came in September, we saw it, and we decided to press gas on it. We did a lot of work. We consulted with a lot of external persons as well as internal. The CPFSA has been integral in it, as well as members of civil society, some members of civil society, as well as other technical persons in academia. We have finished the draft amendment document, and that has now been sent to the relevant entities that I mentioned earlier for their review. One of the things that is very important, though, I want to mention to you, and this is something that we are pushing hard on because Cabinet has mandated it, and it's to deal with the issue of quote-unquote uncontrollable children being placed in juvenile facilities, essentially jail or prison. We as a government do not believe that is appropriate, and though we have put in place systems such as the child diversion process, there are still learned judges who continue to place children in penal facilities. So we have pulled out Section 24 out of the CCP, and it's our intention to repeal it totally, to remove the possibility of a judge using their discretion to place a child in a penal institution when they have not been charged with a crime. So that is where we are with that. As it relates to the reform of the Access to Information Act, you will remember that in Right to Know Week a few months ago, the same questions were asked, and I did give a very long explanation as to what has happened. You would remember that many years ago, I think almost a decade ago, there was a Joint Select Committee that was empaneled to look at the Access to Information Act. I think it was 2011. We started it in 2011, but it never, and the report was submitted, but between 2011 and now, there has not been much movement. We have been moving on it. We have been working with the head of our information division, and we're drafting a cabinet submission to see if we can get direction as to where to go, whether or not the challenge we've been having is that we can't really use the 10-year-old, about 10 years, right, Minister? The 10-year determination of the Joint Select Committee, because a lot of the decisions in it are dated. So the dilemma that the ministry faces is whether to have a new Joint Select Committee, and as you are aware, the parliamentary schedule is very tight, or to have a consultative process. That's a decision that Cabinet is going to have to make. We are about to submit something to Cabinet to get their direction on where to go with it. And I think I made a similar statement in Right to Know Week last year. I don't know if anyone has any more questions.
Minister.
Mr. Campbell, I think you questioned whether or not, since we've been there, if we have taken any legislative action. And yes, we are quite pleased to have brought to the Parliament the CCCJ Act, the amendment for that Act. CCCJ means the Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica. It's an entity that was formed in 1993 to confer degrees And during that time, they operated without the backing of the law to confer degrees. And so that amendment was done. It was one that when we came to the ministry in 2020, we realized the exposure that existed and took immediate action to ensure that that act was amended so that the Council of Community Colleges of Jamaica would be on good legal standing. Additionally, for this legislative year, our plan is to bring the Jamaica Teaching Council Bill to Parliament. We have done a lot of work on it for years, many, for over a decade. This bill has been going back and forth, many consultations with the Jamaica Teachers Association and other stakeholders. It's gone through many ministers, many permanent secretaries. But here we are. We've done the final work on it, and we are expecting that before the close of this legislative year that we will be at Parliament with the Jamaica Teaching Council Bill, it's a bill to increase the professionalize or to improve the profession in terms of persons in the profession, persons seeking to enter the profession of teaching, and to put it on par with other professions. In the legal profession, there is an entity that sees to the good governance of persons in that profession. We have similar in the medical profession and others in the real estate profession and so on. The teaching profession does need its own counsel with the backing of the law to ensure that it works well and that it is as professional as it can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I think we have one final question from Alfia, and we have another. We're taking two more questions, as you can see. We're about to touch the 1 hour mark, which is usually the time designated for the conference. Ms. Saunders.
Yes, I'm just piggybacking a little bit on Edmund's question. Not sure if it was asked because I had to switch devices, but on the JCTE matter, one of the main recommendations that were made by the AG is that the findings should have been forwarded to the police to initiate investigations. Has that been taken up?
Thank you very much, Alfia. Yes, it has. The Minister and the Permanent Secretary have been very cooperative with all the investigative bodies. You would recall that it was from the Ministry that the request to look into all of these issues came, and when the investigation by the AG was done and she made our recommendations and she recommended that the authorities be called in, that was done. And we've been very cooperative. We have nothing to hide. We're very transparent in how we function as ministers and top leadership here at the ministry. So yes, I can assure you, full cooperation, and the recommendations are being implemented as they were recommended by the AG. I think we have Kimoni had a final question.
Right. Is there any update as it relates to casino procurement in the wake of casino legislation passage last year? And what is the status of the FinSAC report? Let me just throw that one in.
Well, I guess it's the new year. Thank you, Kimon, but I would have to do some research on the casino. Minister, has there been any casino legislation? I think the casino legislation was passed, and it was, the casino legislation was passed, and the Governor General, or no, at the time, it was his deputy who signed it, because he wasn't here. And that was more than a year ago. Last year. I think that has been done. As it relates to, what was your last question? The FinSAC report. The FinSAC report. I'm going to refer you to the Ministry of Finance on that one, as I am unaware of the latest information on it. I think the best people to respond to that one would be those who are in custody of it, which would be the Ministry of Finance, as it was their process, and I think they would have all the details. So I know you can reach out and get that response, Kimon.
Getting anywhere.
Pardon?
I have, and I'm not getting anywhere.
Oh, we will inquire of the ministry to find out and get a response to you. Could you record that so I can get a response? I think that's it for today. I'd like to once again wish everyone a happy and prosperous New Year. Thank you all for being a part of this first post-cab press briefing. We apologize for the lateness. We are not usually late, we're usually on time. Thanks to our able, hardworking co-workers at the ministry. Minister Williams, thank you very much. Thanks to the team from JIS. Thanks to those who are online, listening and watching. And let us all work together, keeping safe. Remember to wear your mask, sanitize. Social distancing is still important, even though we're now back at work. It is even more important that we protect ourselves from the various variants that exist. So once again, thank you all for coming out and tuning in. And until next time, have a wonderful day, and please be safe. Thank you.